22 now says, wives, submit to your husband. Then 25 now says, husbands, love your wife. So now you want to ask, do wives submit to their husbands, or do husband and wife submit to one another? We are in God's will for our lives. Clarity means we have direction pertaining to what God will have us do, especially for this year 2026. We don't want to be like somebody that is guessing, that is not sure, that is not aware, all right, that is stumbling, quote and unquote, on God's will, but someone that is in direct partnership, all right, with the Spirit of God. So that's what we're going to be praying about, praying for clarity. Should we fast? Does Jesus expect us to fast? And we identified some points. We said Jesus assumes his disciples will fast. We saw that in Matthew 6:16. We said that Jesus explicitly said his followers will fast after he departs, that is, in his ascension. We saw that in Matthew 14:15. We saw that Jesus himself fasted as a pattern for us. And remember, we said he's the apostolos and high priest of our profession. We saw that in Hebrews 3 verse 13, I believe. Hebrews 3 verse 1, pardon me. We saw that Jesus fasted in Matthew 4, 1-2. And Jesus said this, the servant is not greater than his master, in John 13 verse 16. And then we also saw that the early church practiced fasting under the new covenant. Okay, we saw that in Matthew 13, 2-3. In fact, they fasted before they picked, the leadership. We saw in Acts 14, verse 23 as well. And then number 5, we saw Matthew 4 says that the Spirit led Jesus to fast. And that Spirit is now in us. And the Bible says in Hebrews 13, verse 8, that he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So, we're expected to fast. So practical things to understand as we fast. But what I want to talk about today is the spiritual importance of discipline. That is, there is a spiritual importance to the discipline of fasting. The spiritual importance of discipline. There is a spiritual importance to the discipline of fasting. And I want to share something very, very, very important today, because the Bible talks about an evil day. The Bible talks about an evil day. And a lot of people, all right, will stumble on the day called the evil day. So I want to share, all right, what that means, and how to go about it. 1 Corinthians 9 verse 27. It says, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should be disqualified. But I discipline my body. He didn't say I discipline my spirit, though. He said, I discipline my body and bring it into subjection. And I will show you the context of what it means to discipline your body contextually. Remember, from the moment we start bringing meaning inside the text, that is what is called exegesis. But the correct way to preach the Bible is exegesis. That means, ex, like when you say my ex, that means the person that I was with before, or you say exits. So that's exegesis. Exegesis means to draw out meaning from the text. To draw out meaning from the text. And the way to read the Bible is, contextual interpretation. What that means is I get the meaning of text from its context. Why? Because the text in itself were sentences and the ideas were in paragraphs. The ideas were not in text. Remember that chapterization and, and text was for cross-referencing or referencing. The original writers were just writing letters. And that means that every chapter somehow is connected to one another. And I will give an example with the book of Ephesians for people that are, maybe you just started listening to me and, because everything we do is context. Sometimes the meaning of a word in chapter 4, you understand the idea of that word in chapter 1. For example, I'll give you an example. When the Bible talks about fruit of righteousness, fruit of righteousness doesn't mean fruit of good conduct. Fruit of righteousness actually means Giving. Like when he says, look at 2 Corinthians, let's do 2 Corinthians 9 verse 10. 2 Corinthians 9 verse 10. Now, he that ministered seed to the sower, both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed sown, and increase the fruits of your righteousness. What's that righteousness he's talking about? Now, look at 2 Corinthians 8, because we're going to read verse 9 as well of that 2 Corinthians. We're going to read chapter 9 as well, so you get this. It says, moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, how that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves. For praying us with much entreaty, that we should receive the gifts and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering of the saints. That ministering of the saints there is talking about givings. That's what it talks about in chapter 2, that even though they were poor, in their deep poverty, there was still an abounding, all right, unto the riches of their liberality. So look at verse 1 of that 2 Corinthians 8. Look at verse 1. Please don't forget we are learning the Bible. Don't forget we are learning the Bible. Moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia. Chapter 9 verse 8. I hope you are still here. It says, and God is able to make all grace abound towards you. Now, what is that grace? That grace there is the grace he talks about in chapter 8. When he says, we do it to wit of the grace of God. KJV is something else. Of the grace of God. So when he says in chapter 9 that God is able to make all grace abound to you, that you having all sufficiency in all things may abound to every good work. That every good work is in the context of giving. As it is written, he has dispersed abroad, he has given to the poor, his righteousness remaineth forever. Are you seeing that? His righteousness remaineth forever. So when it comes to chapter 10, and it says, he that ministers seed to the sower, both minister bread for your food, and multiply your seed, and increaseth the fruit of your righteousness. The righteousness he's talking about, you understand it from verse 9. That righteousness he's talking about is liberality. Now, look at Matthew 6. I didn't plan to say all this, but I'm just trying to give you an example of exegesis or interpreting the scriptures properly. Look at Matthew 6 verse 2. Therefore, when you do thine alms, that alms there is when you practice your righteousness. And it says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others. And that practice your righteousness it talks about, is giving. All right. So so if we say fruit of righteousness, you can't just say, oh, let me interpret the meaning of righteousness. No, there is a context to that text. And this is why it's important that you read the Bible in paragraphs. By paragraphs, I mean by thoughts, not by verses. You have to understand the words. Let's give an example with Ephesians. So you go to Ephesians chapter 1, then you go to, I think I need to do learning the Bible again. So you read Ephesians chapter 1, then you go to Ephesians chapter 2. Now see how Ephesians chapter 2 starts. It says, and you hath he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins. How do you start an idea from and you? It's not possible. So that and is a conjunction or a continuation of a sentence. So it means you cannot understand chapter 2 if you have not read chapter 1. Are you getting it? Now let's go to chapter 3. Chapter 3 verse 1, Ephesians chapter 3 verse 1. It says, for this cause I Paul. For which cause? The cause is in chapter 2. So you cannot also understand chapter 3 if you have not read chapter 2. Now, look at chapter 4. I, therefore, the prisoner of Christ. Now, you cannot start a thought from therefore, because therefore means I am saying something, and for that reason. So you cannot also understand Ephesians chapter 4 if you have not read Ephesians chapter 3. Now, look at chapter 5. Be ye therefore. Now, what are you going to be therefore? What was in chapter 4? So you cannot also understand chapter 5 if you have not read chapter 4. Now, look at chapter 5. It gives a new idea starts in Ephesians chapter 5 verse 22. It says, wives submit. Oh, this is a perfect example, and I'm going to teach about this next week. So when you read, let's read Ephesians chapter 5 verse 17 to 21. This will give perfect, and like I said, I'll teach about this because I'm teaching about, we're starting our love series. It says, wherefore be ye not unwise, but understanding what the will of God is. And be not drunk with wine wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your hearts to the Lord, giving thanks always for all things unto God and the Father in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. Then he now says, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. Now, when you read this, verse 21 says, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. 22 now says, wives, submit to your husband. Then 25 now says, husbands, love your wife. So now you want to ask, do wives submit to their husbands, or do husband and wife submit to one another? The difference or the understanding is in the context. It's not a contradiction. If you want to check maybe the Greek word for submitting in 21, is it the same Greek word for submitting in 22? Yes, they are the same exact Greek word. Upotasos. Let me check for you. 22 is upotasso as well. And it means to put under, to be subject unto, to be subject to submit oneself unto, to be in subjection to. So it's the same Greek word. So you can't say maybe there is a level of submission that God expects from husband and wife, then there is another level of submission that God expects from the wife to the husband. It's the same exact Greek word. Ephesians chapter 5. Say, what Bible are you using? Ephesians chapter 5, I'm reading Ephesians 5, verse 21 and 22, and I'm using KJV. And today I want to pray for the sick, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. Then 22 says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husband as unto the Lord. What that means is the idea of 21. The paragraph ends in 21. Then a brand new idea starts in 22. And the idea of Ephesians chapter 5 verse 22 continues even to Ephesians 6, where it talks about children. Then afterwards, it now talks about servants. And that idea ends in Ephesians 6 verse 9. The new idea now starts in Ephesians 6 verse 10. Where he says, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. I don't know if you are understanding this. So what's the difference between 21, Ephesians 5:21, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God, and Ephesians 5:22, when it says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husband? Ephesians 5:21 ends the idea on how to conduct yourself in the house of God. Are you understanding this? That's why he said, look at it, look at the context. Be not drunk with wine when there is excess, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing to yourselves. So what he's addressing in Ephesians 5, verse 17 to 21 is church. In church, we submit to ourselves. But in 22, he now describes the noun as wives, not women. As wives. Wives. There is a Greek word for woman. There is a Greek word for wife. This one is gune. I hope I'm right. Yes. This one is gune. It is a wife. It's an office. Because you can be a woman and not be a wife. So he says, wives, submit to your own husband. So he's saying in church, we submit to one another. Because in church, you don't have quote and unquote wives. You have male and female. You have women and men. So in church, women and men submit to one another. But in the family, wives submit to their own husband. And then there is a clear role for the husbands. Now, you might miss them if you don't understand contextual interpretation. And I hope you're understanding this. So there is something called contextual interpretation. Anyways, we don't read the Bible in chapters. We read the Bible, all right, in paragraphs. We interpret, all right, the scriptures. We interpret the idea of scriptures in paragraphs. That's the way to read it. Okay, we said there is a spiritual importance to discipline, or to the discipline of fasting. And we read 1 Corinthians 9 verse 27. But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself may be disqualified. In other words, he's saying that if I don't discipline my body and bring it into subjection, he says I may be disqualified. It's there. There's no need to sermonize. It's just there and it's clear. Now, look at verse 24. 1 Corinthians 9. Now, look at 24. It says, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. So that disqualification is disqualified from receiving a reward. What does it mean by disciplining or training the body? The idea of training the body is to train, not to torture. It is to train, it's not to torture. It is not penance. Some years ago, I was pastoring a campus fellowship. And because I wanted to be, firm, and I wanted to have a level of discipline, all right, in the fellowship. So I said, when leaders come late, I'm going to make them pray. They'll wait back and pray. Eventually, I first started with the jog, but later I said, I'll make them pray. If you come late by 1 hour, you pray 2 hours. And I will stay there and wait with you and watch you pray. So basically, I was punishing them to pray. I was punishing them with prayer. And I'm trying to say something about spiritual discipline. So people don't miss what we are saying. People don't get what we are saying wrong. Because spiritual discipline is not torture. Spiritual discipline is not penance. Maybe I made a mistake. I'm struggling with pornography. Then I now made a mistake. And I'll go and say, I'm going to do dry fast for 4 days. Not that I'm fasting so that God can teach me or show me how to win, but I'm fasting to punish my flesh. No, that's not what we are discussing. That's not discipline. That's torture. Are you understanding what I'm saying? What you are doing in that situation is you are taking the place of God. Instead of you to receive forgiveness of sins, you judged and you punished yourself. In other words, you took the place of God. You want to take the place of God and judge.